Hey YouTube, this is StylesbyNina. Well, yeah, literally Nina, and we're on chapter 6, and I'm going to start where I left off, which is on page 128. The author's note: the following report by Dr. Pasp concerning FEMA and concentration camps in the United States is photographed and printed exactly as written. In the United States, a national emergency total takeover. This is Dr. William R. Pasp. My address is 1434 West Alabama Street, Houston, Texas 77006. My telephone number is area code 713-521-9896. This is my 1979 updated reported on the concentration camp program in the concentration camp program of the Department of Defense of the United States on April 20th, 1976. After a rapid and thorough investigation, I filed a suit on behalf of the people of the United States against various personages that had a key part in conspiratorial program to do away with the United States as we know it. This is a progress report to you, the plaintiffs, you, the people of the United States. The civil action number is 76H667. It is entitled Complaint Against the Concentration Camp Program of the Department of Defense. It was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas, Houston Division. The judge responsible for the case was Judge Carl Bill. You have no doubt heard the story. Once upon a time, under the Nazi regime in Germany, a man worked on an assembly line in a baby carriage factory. His wife was going to have a baby, but the Nazi government would not let anybody buy a baby carriage. The man decided he would secretly collect one part from each department and assemble the carriage himself. When this was done, he and his wife gathered up the pieces and assembled it. When they were finished, they did not have a baby carriage. They had a machine gun. And that is exactly the situation that I am going to present to you at this time. The Center for the Study for Democratic Institutions recently completed a proposed constitution for the new states of America. The center is Rockefeller funded. To give you an indication of the type of constitution proposed, the term national emergency is mentioned 134 times. The document did not have a Bill of Rights, and the right to own arms was taken away. At the same time, House Concurrent Resolution number 28 awaited for calling a constitutional convention on or before July 4th, 1976. The presiding officer of such an event would have been Nelson Rockefeller, Vice President and President pro turn of the Senate. This particular resolution awaited in committee. Obviously, money would not be spent on these massive programs unless there would be the chance for the actual implementation of such a scheme. However, in case the American people do not voluntarily adopt to a new constitution less troublesome to those who desire dictatorship, there is Executive Order number 11490, which will include its predecessors when it is cited herein. The executive order authorizes the secretaries of the various agencies to prepare for any national emergency type situation, including but not limited to those specified in the executive order itself. If you read the order, there is nothing at all left to the imagination for any conceivable pretense a national emergency may be declared based upon this frightening decree dated October 1969. The order itself was prefaced in March of '69 by another executive order which established the federal regions and their capitals. All the departments of the government were involved, including LEAA, Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, and HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. Congressman Larry McDonald has revealed to Congress that various guerrilla and terrorist groups were being financed by the federal government. If the terrorist groups, actually began insurgent activities, Executive Order 11490 would be activated. But as mentioned previously, if you will read Executive Order number 11490, you will see that a national emergency may be declared for any conceivable pretense whatsoever. If the order itself were activated, here is what would happen. The next day, you and your family would be standing in front of your local post office with your neighbors, the front door bursting with block-long lines of people waiting to be registered. After waiting in line with your family for hours, you finally get channeled through the doors. Once inside, you overhear the postal clerk with his sidearm on telling a frightened restraint. Look, there is nothing I can do. The truck behind the building will take you to a work camp where you have been assigned. Your wife has been assigned to a factory and there's nothing I can do. Then your son or daughter looks up at you with a quivering voice and asks, Dad, why are we here? Implement the new government. Well, you see there's much more to life in a free country than paying your mortgage. You have to be aware of what's going on and act accordingly and participate in government. That is, get involved. Examining the organization chart on Executive Order 11490 to discover how we have all helped finance through our tax dollars the mechanics of the overthrow of our Constitution. Executive Order 11490 designates certain authorities to the Office of Emergency Preparedness, which in turn designates authority to the various departments of the federal government. If order were implemented, the Post Office Department would be responsible for a national registration. The State Department would be responsible for the protection of the United Nations personnel or property and prevention of escape from the United States. The Department of Defense would be responsible for the expropriation of industry, direction of services, and national production system, control of censorship and communication, expropriation of non-industrial facilities. The Commerce Department would be responsible for expropriation, selection, and international distribution of commodities, which would be the actual looting of the United States, census information, and human resources. The Treasury Department would be responsible for collection of cash and non-cash items and the recreation of evidence of assets and liabilities. The Justice Department would have concurrent responsibility with the Department of State for prevention of escape from the United States, for replenishing the stockpile of narcotics, for a national police force, for correctional and penal institutions, for mass feeding and housing of prisoners, and for use of prisoners to augment manpower, which would be slave labor. The federal bank, which is not a federal bank, would be responsible for regulation of withdrawal of currency. The GSA, General Services Administration, would be responsible for confiscation of private property for government use. Health, education, and welfare will be responsible for nationalization of education, which the Department of Education has already done. Health services, hospital, and mental institutions has already done. Health service, hospitals, and mental institutions. The Labor Department will be responsible for recruiting manpower, selecting manpower, referring manpower, and allocating manpower so each particular person that was registered at the post office in this national registration would be told where he or she was going to work. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, would be responsible for transfer of persons to temporary or permanent housing in regional emergency planning and cooperation. The Transportation Department is responsible for emergency enforcement and control and movement of passengers and the emergency operation of the Alaska Railroad. There are two specific agencies here that we need to look at and to keep in mind. They are HEW and Justice Department. As those two agencies are related to the Department of Defense, the various military departments are part of the Department of Defense. Under it, we have the Secretary of Army, Chief of Staff, Deputy Chief or Staff of Personnel and Law Enforcement, U.S. Army Forces Command, and Continental Army Reserve and National Guard. And under that, we have the four armies dividing up the United States. Under the 5th Army, we have the Provost Marshal, who is directly connected to the Deputy Chief of Staff for the law enforcement personnel. Under the Provost Marshal for the 5th Army, we have the 300 Military Police Prisoner of War POW Command at Livonia, Michigan. At this point, I quote from the retired Admiral Elmo Zunwalt's book, On Watch. Kissinger states, I believe the American people lack the will to do things necessary to achieve parity and to maintain maritime superiority. I believe we must get the best deal we can in our negotiations before the United States and the Soviets both perceive these changes and the balance that occurs. When these perceptions are in agreement and both sides know the U.S. is inferior, we must have gotten the best deal we can. Americans at that time will not be happy that I have settled for second, but it will be too late. Zumwalt said, then why not take it to the American people? They will not accept the decision to become second best while we are in a position of gross national product twice that of the USSR. Kissinger responds, that's a question of judgment. I judge that we will not get their support, and if we seek it and tell that fact as we would have to, we would lose our negotiating leverage with the Soviets. Zumwalt stated, but isn't that the ultimate immorality in a democracy, to make a decision for the people of such importance without consulting them? Kissinger stated, perhaps, but I doubt that there are 1 million who could even understand the issue. Zumwalt responded, even if that presumption is correct, those 1 million can influence the opinions of the majority of the people. I believe it is my duty to take the other course. Kissinger responded, you should take care lest your words result in a reduction in the Navy budget. So we see what the intention of the State Department is regarding the people. Another fact, on December 30 of 1975, the California National Guard announced in a press release, which I have, that the state's military police battalions were organized and trained to provide immediate response to virtually every civil and man-made disaster, as well as to assist law enforcement officers in emergency situations to carry out their law enforcement as well as their military mission. When I asked for of the defendants in this case for their mission statement. They did not provide it, although they say it is public information. And training spoken of for the California National Guard covers such subjects as dealing with individual civilians, civil population, detention procedures, citizens' rights, and similar matters. As you know as well as I do, that when there is martial law or martial rule, citizens have no rights because the Constitution is preempted. Even the uniforms of the National Guards who participate in this program are different from the regular uniforms. Army spokesmen will not reveal more about the uniforms, but the Los Angeles Sheriff Department paramilitary units who have received this training also have Army fatigues dyed black for their uniforms. A further fact is the disaster preparedness plan for the Marine Corps Supply Center in Barstow, California. Quoting from that document, under the Constitution and the laws of the United States, the preservation of law and order is the responsibility of local and state government, and the authority to maintain the peace and enforce the law is invested in the authorities of those governments. There are specific exemptions to the above concept. One of these pertains to federal intervention to civil disturbances in certain situations. Military commanders are deemed to have the inherent authority to take any measure reasonably necessary for the protection of life and property in the event of a sudden unexpected public calamity which disrupts the normal process of government and presents an emergency so imminent as to make it dangerous to await instructions from appropriate authorities. This includes law enforcement duties. The manual mentions something called Garden Plot Forces, which we will discuss at length in a few minutes. Don Bell, who writes a weekly report, reported on July 25th, 1975, that in May of 1975, the 303 Civil Affairs Group of the U.S. Army Reserve in Kearney, New Jersey, conducted an exercise to sharpen plans for a military takeover of the state government in New Jersey. According to the Colonel Francis Clark, they had conducted similar studies on how to seize municipal and county government over the past few years, but this was the first time they had studied state government. Such units were trained during World War II to operate captured governments in the foreign. We never had federal troops training to take over governments in the United States. When local violence or catastrophe struck, the National Guard, under command of the governor, went into action. This is definitely not the situation this time. On February 16, 1975, in the San Gabriel Valley Tribune, it was reported that the LEAA, funded by the Department of Justice, and the Police Foundation, funded by the Ford Foundation, are prime movers towards implementing a national police force. Each, however, contends they support local police agencies. The total program invoices military units that have the function of taking over the administration of local and state governments. That program is Operation Cable Splicer by Army Civil Affairs Group, a sub-plan of Operation Garden Plot, the martial law program. The method by which the national police concept is being presented to the public has changed. It was first disguised under the cover of protection against civil disturbances. The program was as follows: A. Keep the people from gathering in the streets. B. Isolate and neutralize the revolution's leadership. C. Dispersal of crowds and demonstrators. This is followed by successful persecution in order to 1. Validate the action of the police, 2. Deny the arrestees propaganda materials, and 3. Deny them the opportunity to recover money damages against the police for arresting them. Let me quote for the scenario which was developed for Cable Spicer 1, 2, and 3 to justify the needs for dealing with civilian disturbances. Phase 1, an arrest and shooting provoke crowd unrest and threat against public officials, and a riot begins to form. Phase 2, police vehicles are ambushed, various attempted assassinations of public officials occur, destruction and raiding of armories occur, and thousands of people begin to gather and local police lose control. Phase 3, increased movement of rioters, and the crowds must be dispersed before they become sympathetic with the rioters. The National Guard and the local police lose control. This scenario provides for an orderly transition from state to federal control. The Deputy Attorney General of California commented at a Cable Spicer 3 conference that anyone who attacks the state, even verbally, becomes a revolutionary and an enemy by definition. They are the enemy and must be destroyed. This program was taught in almost every state west of the Mississippi River and included as participants local active military, reserve military, and civilian police. The course name was Civil Emergency Management Course. The official explanation that was to be given if any questions were asked about the program was, this activity is a continuous joint law enforcement military liaison effort and a continuation of coordination established last year. In 1976, the Oakland Tribune carried the most complete explanation of what is planned. It is reported in its entirety in the National Chronicle, which added an analysis to the story. The Oakland Tribune's editor died suddenly after the story was published, and I quote, "Last Saturday, the California National Guard unveiled a new law enforcement assistance force, LEAF, a specially trained and outfitted military police unit whose members will serve as a shock troops in the state's war against political protesters and demonstrators. I saw a full-dress exhibition of what the California National Guard has planned for the next American Revolution. Helicopters, SWAT teams, civilian, military, policemen in jackboots and helmets, 12-gauge shotguns, .38s, and .45 caliber pistols, radios, walkie-talkies, and electronically controlled intelligence centers wired for instant communication with any police force in the state. LEAF is a 1,000-member unit put together this year to handle unique law enforcement problems such as mass civil disobedience, protest demonstrations, and riots. In other words, breaking heads and taking names. LEAF has the support of the Governor Brown, $250,000 worth of grants from the federal government, and no public opposition from civil liberties groups. For all its ineptitude, however, LEAF has a frightening possibility. From a civil liberties standpoint, it is a direct product of the California Cable Spicer Conferences, a series of high-level secret meetings between government officials, law enforcement officers, and military planners held during the late 60s and early 70s. The meetings were held as late as 1975. So far as many public records show, these were the conferences which Counterspy magazine had identified as California's Garden Plot subplan. Gary Davis, Governor Brown's right-hand man, says LEAF is to assist civil police, not to replace them. Gary says civilians could expect a civilian-type law enforcement rather than what is commonly known as martial law. Despite this assurance, LEAF's exercises look disturbingly like the military coup described in the novel 7 Days in May. LEAF soldiers with nightsticks stood at intersections stopping cars with suspicious occupants, checking ID cards, and generally intimidating onlookers with their SWAT-style uniforms, their sidearms, and helmets. Perhaps more ominously, several participants in the role-playing exercise Saturday admitted that even under simulated pressure, there has already been a number of incidents where leave troops used excessive force to quell disturbances, even though their orders forbade it. End quote. And that's former Leaf Administrator Charles Roscommon is on record as having stated that local law enforcement has failed and must be replaced by a national police force. Patrick Murphy, the administrator of the Police Foundation, states, "I have no fear of national police force. Our 40,000 police departments are not scared." Ex-Attorney General William Saxby warned that if we can go on as we are, crime will invade us and the national police will take over. For the policemen who do not cooperate and still want to be policemen, there is the program of Contemporary Research, Inc., an organization of psychologists, sociologists, education specialists, and economic experts who work towards a solution of many of today's social problems. The same organization develops and specialized computer programming for the new worldwide military command and control system, as well as computer-based systems for law enforcement agencies at all levels of government. The LEAA alone will receive over $1 billion a year over the next 4 years, even though it has been ineffective against crime. This is because the LEAA is not geared to fighting crime. It's geared to developing a system for takeover of the United States with the assistance of the Department of Defense. One of the programs the LEAA works on in its fight against crime is psychosurgery. If you don't cooperate with their programs, you are merely operated on so that you'd be as cooperative as an adding machine, or the LEAA supports drug research for the same purpose, to neutralize neurological sources of violence. Hence, as an example, if a law were passed whereby the ownership of firearms was declared to be illegal, you would be placed in one of these programs if you did not cooperate. The LEAA control exercise at the state's level is from the Office of Criminal Justice Planning of the Governor's Office. Here in Texas, Mr. Robert C. Flowers is still the executive director in that office, but all states have that particular department. In May 1975, the LEAA newsletter describes the function of one of its organizations, the National Institute of Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice. This organization funds something called the United Nations Clearinghouse in Rome, Italy. The function of that organization is, among other things, the exchange of criminal justice system information with the Soviet Union. And it goes without saying that we have nothing to learn from the criminal justice system of the Soviet Union. These incredible projects are being funded with our tax dollars. The code name for these projects are Garden Plot and Cable Splicer. Garden Plot is a program to control the population. Cable Splicer is a program for an orderly takeover of the state and local governments by the federal government. An investigation was completed in November 1975 by 4 sources: the conservative publication American Challenge, the leftist New Times, the Foundation of Finance Fund for Investigative Journalism, and Don Wood of the trustworthy Ozark Sunbeam. It involves the potential creation of a police state through the use of the Pentagon and its computerized intelligence dossier lodged in the Pentagon basement of thousands of citations by the National Guard, state and local police departments, the LEAA plainclothes military forces, SWAT teams, and the Department of Justice. And I'm going to see how far we have to go for. Yeah, I'm going to stop right here. Um, for some reason, I thought chapter 6 would be broken up into 2 parts, but it is going to be a 3-parter, right? So we're going to stop right here. This page 134. We're going to pick up on page 135. Peace and power to you, YouTube family, friends. Well, family, friends. And I'm out of here.